Here we go. Find the beans, guys.
I realized something nearly a decade ago while we were living in the suburbs, and it comes across a little controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. Gyms exist because farms don't.
Yeah, look at those.
By gym, I mean rec centers and workout facilities, and I don't have any scientific data or charts to back this up, it's just an observation. But as farms and homesteads have decreased across the American landscape, the amount of energy needing to be released and put towards something has increased dramatically. Now, I say this as someone who has formerly had gym memberships and has really valued participating in athletic activities and sports and still does. But the issue I see is that our energy at its core yearns for productivity, to produce something outside of our own selves. This is yet another reason why I find this homesteading lifestyle so compelling. Our efforts continually amount towards something physical that we can grab hold of, foods we can eat and enjoy that nourish our bodies and our whole family. This past week, we harvested and stored away some 600 pounds of food that will feed our family of 7 all year, which was no small task. Yes, Joelle just had a baby a couple weeks ago, and yes, she's taking it easy as we go, but as we both approach 40 years old, we feel better than ever. Join us for a week of seeing just how productive this year's harvest was and the simple methods we use to store it all for the year ahead. Our basement has become our own grocery store, and we knew harvesting and storing everything away down there couldn't start until we had the space to do so. Last year, around harvest time, our basement was in bad shape and needed a major overhaul. This year, it wasn't as bad, but basements just tend to be a place where things collect, and before we brought in hundreds of pounds of food, we knew this was our chance to give this space the cleaning and organizing it needed. Basement cleanup is also something I get pretty overwhelmed by, so I'm really grateful my parents came by for the day and helped whip it back into shape. They're a pretty awesome tag team cleanup duo, so my dad grabbed the mop and went to work on our floors. My mom and our oldest daughter helped clean a lot of things up, including giving our heavy-duty storage rack we'd soon be filling up with squash a good scrub down, and I tried to get everything in order and in its right place. After a few hours of hard work, we have our basement back again. Let the harvesting begin. The late summer and fall here have been so warm and nice that it almost didn't even seem like frost was a threat. But all of a sudden, as we headed into our main harvest week, both Thursday and Friday nights showed a strong chance of frost. This would significantly impact how we prioritized and ordered our harvesting for the week. For us, this meant first up would be sweet potatoes. But before getting to harvesting, that morning I needed to move our fencing for our cows and chickens for what may very well be the final fencing move of the year. We try to keep them on pasture as long as we can, but with the colder nights and frost setting in, the pasture will pretty much stop growing, and at this point they'll just be cleaning up whatever's out there. Our goal is always to make it at least to November on pasture before switching to hay for the winter months.
That afternoon, we set to work harvesting sweet potatoes. This area is where we have our orchard with 30 fruit trees and also grow the bulk of our storage crops. We have one 150-foot long row where we grow the three sisters, so corn, beans, and squash, and then another 150-foot row where we grow 100 feet of potatoes and then 50 feet of sweet potatoes, both in double wide rows. Of these crops, really the only thing that we've harvested so far is our sweet corn that we grew this year. So we have a lot of ground to cover. And digging up potatoes is definitely the most time-consuming of it all. We're always gung-ho to get harvesting right away, but then we usually forget that there's prep work that needs to be done first, like pulling back the drip lines we've installed for irrigation and clearing out the weeds. It always takes longer to get going with the actual activity that you came for out there than you think. With the frost coming, we mentioned sweet potatoes were our top priority, and that's because sweet potatoes are really a warm weather plant and are particularly susceptible to frost. Even though the sweet potato tubers are buried underground, they can still be damaged if the vines growing above the surface undergo a hard enough frost, so we didn't want to take any chances. And speaking of the vines, many of you mentioned how much of a delicacy the leaves of sweet potato plants are, so we made sure to give them a try along the way. In fact, while our kids were out there searching for toads and other creatures while helping with the harvest, they were plucking up sweet potato leaves and chowing down and saying how good they were. You can also cook up sweet potato leaves similarly to spinach, and they're super rich in nutrients. We were pleasantly surprised with our sweet potato harvest last year after growing them from slips that we bought, so this year we thought we'd try to save some expense and grow our own slips. We showed how we did this in a past video, but overall growing slips was pretty easy, and we were thrilled to see our homegrown slips produced just as well as the ones that we bought. And after a half-day chunk of harvesting, we got through roughly 1/3 of our row of sweet potatoes, and we were really happy with the results. We filled 2 bins with sweets, and while there were plenty of those small, thin potatoes, there were also plenty of big, beautiful sweet potatoes along the way. We didn't go through and harvest the sweet potato leaves for eating, we just snacked on them, but this is one of the big reasons that we love raising animals so much. They consume so many of the good and nourishing foods that we can't get to, and then return it to us as nourishment in other forms. We collected up so many binfuls along the way, and our cows didn't just eat the leaves, but the whole vines and any sweet potatoes that were too small or damaged to keep. And with Thimble, our Jersey milk cow, being pregnant, she was more than happy to get the extra treats, with the pasture getting a little bit thin these days. Jacket? There you go, buddy. We are nice and cocooned.
The next day, we weren't exactly sure what to expect weather-wise. Rain was in the forecast for later in the day, and another thing we wanted to harvest before the frost came was our butternut squash. So that's what we set out to harvest that morning. This is one our kids love to get involved with. The squash plants sprawl everywhere, and with the tall grass growing up over them, it's like a treasure hunt for them to run around and track down all the squash on both sides of this 150-foot long row. Many of the plants had already died back and dried out, making it easy to snap the squash stem off the vine. But some can be a little tricky, and sometimes we'll even grab a pair of loppers or shears to cut the squash off the vine.
Wow guys, look at all these huge ones. Wow, there's like 5 right here.
There are so many different types of squash varieties, but winter squash in particular are best suited for storage. We've grown many different varieties of winter squash in the past, but in the end, the traditional Waltham butternut squash that we get seed from at Seed Savers Exchange is our favorite, so that is exclusively what we grow now.
I box it.
Plus, many squash will cross-pollinate, so if you have plans of saving seed, it's easier to just grow a single variety of squash rather than having multiple different kinds.
Hold on to your stems. There we go.
In terms of bang for your buck, winter squash is the best. Each butternut squash averages 2 to 3 pounds, so they give you good return with a ton of energy and nutrient-rich fruit. They grow abundantly, and harvesting and storing them long-term is so quick and easy. I can link a whole video we made on all the ways that I use butternut squash in cooking, but butternut squash are so versatile for both cooking and baking. They're the perfect sweetness and consistency for any recipes calling for pumpkin, and we love just eating them roasted as a side or adding butternuts to various soups or casseroles. We made sure to have plenty of storage bins on hand and just made our way down the rows, filling the bins with squash as we went and leaving them in the rows to collect up later. Everything we grow organically without any sprays, so inevitably we always have some loss every year to pests. Maybe 10 or 15 squash were too far gone for us to harvest, so we either leave them there to hopefully keep pests away from other crops, or we collect them up to feed to our animals. That's a big part of why we try to add as much diversity to our growing as possible, as well as growing enough quantities of everything so that we can always absorb some loss. In this space, we're growing several different types of fruit and storage crops, along with providing trees, pasture, and the crops themselves for habitat. It's a diverse quarter-acre section of land, and our experience has been that when you create that type of diversity, nature has a way of producing abundantly for everyone involved. We ended up with 9 bins full of butternut squash, or roughly 125 squash. And near the end of gathering up the bins and bringing them to the house to bring to the basement, the rain started coming. The squash would be fine, but Jim still wanted to hurry to get them in and stored away so they didn't get completely drenched.
Oh. All right. Squash.
Well, Matt, you look fun outside in the rain, always, right?
I mean, it is fun in the rain.
Since it was raining on and off the rest of the day, we wouldn't be able to get back to the sweet potatoes anyway, so it was the perfect time to finish up a little basement prep and get what we've harvested already laid out to cure.
Oh yeah. Look at that guy.
Since the bins of squash were sitting right in the middle of the basement, that's what we needed to store away first. This isn't an overly hard task, it's really just moving the squash from the bins onto our storage rack, but we do have some strategy behind it. As is true with most crops, the biggest, best looking crops are the ones that will store the best, and the ones that are smaller or maybe damaged typically won't store as well. So we started by grabbing the biggest and best squash and putting those on the bottom rack. Our theory is that since heat rises, the temperatures at the bottom rack should stay consistently cooler in our basement than on the top rack, so it makes sense to put the bigger ones down lower. Then we just fill in the rest of the squash, getting progressively smaller as we go up. Squash also go through a curing process, so we lay them out in a single layer, making sure they don't touch. Now, you could move them back into bins after a couple weeks of curing to reduce how much space they take up, but for squash, we've ended up just leaving them put and storing them long term just like this. They've stored great this way. In fact, we recently cleared out several squash from last year down here to make room for the new ones, and they were still perfectly firm and beautiful. Plus, when a few of them inevitably go bad, they're easy to locate and remove without doing damage to the squash stored around them. We love these Gladiator brand storage racks that you can find at Home Depot or elsewhere. With hundreds of pounds of food stored away on each shelf, you want something heavy duty. And they also fit our black plastic harvest bins perfectly for when we eventually move our bins full of potatoes and sweet potatoes onto the rack. Speaking of those storage bins, some of you mentioned that they're also called bulb bins, and nurseries or greenhouses commonly utilize them or receive bulb shipments in them, so that might also be a good place to find used harvest bins. Those 9 bins of squash pretty much filled up all 4 shelves, which should be plenty for our family for the year ahead.
For curing our many sweet potatoes and potatoes, we try to create as much flat surface area down here as possible. We have some wire storage racks on wheels that are really nice for this, and then we just set up some other flat surfaces. In this case, we have a couple old doors and a countertop that we set up on top of some spare buckets or bins. So next was laying out the sweet potatoes that we harvested the prior day to cure, and we started with those on our wire storage racks. You could just leave potatoes in bins. We've done that before and they've stored fine, but we've found that sweet potatoes and potatoes store best for longest when they go through this process called curing. How we do this is by laying them out on an open, flat surface in a single layer so that they're not touching each other. Curing can be done upstairs too in a little bit of a warmer room temperature, but really our basement is the only place that we have enough space to lay them out like this, so that's where we do it. As they cure with lots of airflow over the course of a couple weeks, their skins thicken up and any blemishes or damage from pests or the harvesting process heals up so that potatoes are optimized for storage and go into a state of dormancy. The other thing we do as we lay out our sweet potatoes to cure is that we snap off the ends that are soft or bendy. Just the solid tubers that are firm are best for long-term storage, so snapping off any soft parts or ends helps them to store better. Then we typically just set aside any smaller or soft sweet potatoes in another bin, and those are the ones that we'll eat through first.
Can I get you some? Okay, this looks delish.
One of the things that has made getting out to harvest this week with a newborn even possible has been the generosity of many friends dropping off meals for our family. I have hardly cooked since Sam has been born, and it's been so helpful to be able to both help harvest but also to really enjoy the newborn phase and soak it in as much as possible. Today is actually one of the first times I'm back to cooking, and I'm cutting up some of our recently harvested sweet potatoes and onions and making a big old pot of butternut squash chili. And to go with it, we're gonna enjoy some of these freshly baked biscuits from Wild Grain. We recently received a box from Wild Grain, and it's been such a gift. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box with sourdough breads, fresh pasta, and artisan pastries. Every item that we received in our Wild Grain box could be baked in 25 minutes or less with no mess or cleanup. And we've all agreed that they are some of the most delicious treats we've ever had. The kids have been asking specifically for more of their croissants, and these fresh baked ginger molasses cookies are so good.
Those are delicious.
A box from Wild Grain would make such a great gift this holiday season, or a gift card so that they could customize their own personal box. To check out Wild Grain, be sure to use the link in the description and use code FROMSCRATCH to get $30 off your first box. Plus, you'll get free croissants for life.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Delicious. Or delicious. Delicious.
Looks like a fat one. Let's see what we
Good.
get.
Oh, that looks like a good one. Whew. Yeah, look at those
Yeah.
beauties.
Harvesting sweet potatoes is similar but different to harvesting potatoes. Potatoes more or less grow in the vicinity of where the plant was growing, but you really need to dig up everywhere around the plant because you just don't know where they might be. Sweet potatoes tend to grow in a clump directly below the plant, for the most part. So the easiest way we've found to do it is to locate the plant above the surface, then dig in with your digging fork or potato fork, loosen up the soil around the plant, and then in an ideal world, the whole clump of sweet potatoes just pulls right out.
Oh, look at that guy. Beauty. Whew. There's some sweet potatoes. All right. If only they all came out like that.
They didn't always come out in a nice bunch, and often you'd still find rogue sweet potatoes just growing all over the place, but locating the plants and focusing your efforts there is definitely the most efficient way to go about it. I can also link the all-metal digging fork we picked up for this, but I definitely recommend getting the right tool for the job when it comes to digging potatoes. We had broken a few wooden-handled forks in the past, but this solid metal one is always up for the challenge. And that brings me back to last year's harvest where, if you remember, our soil was really compacted and digging everything up took a huge effort. I'm happy to report this year so far has been a completely different experience, which I think is due to two reasons. One, the bigger, more powerful tiller we picked up for our compact tractor really did the trick getting down deep and loosening up the soil well in just a couple passes. And two, I also think putting down a good layer of straw mulch early on helped keep the soil less compacted. These days of digging potatoes are long and tough on your body any way you slice it. Constant up, down, bending, squatting, digging. It's a full body workout. But it was so much nicer overall working in loose soil that required a lot less effort. After putting in another solid few hours on day 2 of harvesting sweet potatoes, we got about another third of the sweet potatoes harvested and pulled in another 2 bins. Those quickly filled up our smaller wire storage racks in the basement, and we started moving on to our other flat storage surfaces for curing. With all the potatoes left to harvest still, I'm beginning to think we're going to have a bit of a curing space crisis on our hands.
By our third day harvesting sweet potatoes, we were running like a well-oiled machine, but the process is still just slow. And you may be wondering how we're doing all of this with a newborn in the picture. So for certain things like harvesting squash, I can put him in the carrier, but that wouldn't work as well for sweet potatoes where I'm down on my hands and knees. Thankfully, Sam has been a good sleeper and will often nap for 2 or 3 hour chunks at a time. So what we've been doing is getting everything ready to head out and harvest, and then I'll feed him and lay him down for a nap and use that time while he's sleeping. Usually one of our older kids will be inside working on a project of some sort and can let me know if he gets up, or if not, we rotate running back in to check on him and make sure he's still sleeping every few minutes. It can be a little bit of back and forth, but thankfully he's been giving us great naps during these harvest times, so it's actually worked out really well.
One of the things I realized after day 1 was that it was helpful to do some prep work in advance before we got out there. So I had actually gone out there prior to day 2 and removed all the drip tape in the row and pulled back some of the sweet potato vines just to clear things out so we could keep rolling with the harvesting. One of our failed experiments with growing our own sweet potato slips this year was realizing it's not a good idea to just plant a whole sprouting sweet potato in the ground. After clipping the sprouts that formed as slips, we still had the sweet potatoes that we grew the slips with left in the end, and they had a lot of small sprouts on them, similar to the sprouts or eyes that you'd find on seed potatoes. We figured, what could it hurt to throw those in the ground too and see what happened? They grew a sweet potato plant, but the tubers they produced were super long and thin. Some were like 2 to 3 feet long, which is not ideal at all. And that potato that you planted still remained and turned this off-looking color and definitely wouldn't be good for eating. So you needed to make sure you located and discarded those. So stick with planting the slips was our takeaway.
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. That's how you learn.
All right.
Hurrah!
Sweet potatoes.
Did it.
Done.
We dug up a couple more bins worth that last morning of harvesting sweet potatoes, and we were so thrilled with the harvest this year, especially knowing we did it by growing our own slips from last year's harvest.
Okay, it's Thursday, so frost is coming tonight. Everything else that would be susceptible for frost needed to get either harvested or covered up. The beans and potatoes left out in the Three Sisters garden should be fine, so we're just gonna leave those. The rest of that afternoon we spent in our kitchen garden making sure that we harvested everything we could out there. First up was our cabbage.
All right. What do we got?
Cabbage is a cold weather crop, so it would probably withstand the frost fine, but it was our last main crop growing in this garden space, and we really just wanted to wrap it up. We grew about 1.5 rows of red Calabos cabbage, and we're happy to see some big heads of cabbage growing here at the end of the season. It always surprises me how big cabbage gets when it starts getting cooler out. For whatever reason, we've had better luck with red cabbage, both growing and storing, than green cabbage, so that's what we stick to. Plus, that deeper purple color offers some added nutrients. For harvesting cabbage, I just take a small paring knife and cut off the head of cabbage near the bottom of the plant. Then I'll usually pull off a couple of the looser leaves around the outside prior to storing. We'll typically eat through a couple heads of cabbage fresh and make coleslaw or things like that, but the majority of them I'll turn into sauerkraut later once things have slowed down for the season. So for now, we tie them up in plastic grocery bags and put them in a spare fridge, and the whole heads of cabbage will store just fine for a couple of months until I get around to processing them. As I'm finishing up with the cabbage, I wanted to take one final pass through our tomatoes to grab any that were ripe and salvageable. With baby Sam joining us, I haven't been on top of tomatoes this year as much as I normally am, but we still canned as many jars of tomatoes as we need for the year, and our plants produced quite a bit, so we're happy to be done with them after today. Jim is also going through and snipping off the remaining cabbage plants, gathering those up along with any weeds that he can pull out quickly. A couple of loads of those will make an extra special treat for the cows. We also grabbed the last of the peppers that remained on our lone hot pepper plant, and man, that was one productive plant this year. Our second planting of lettuce is still hanging in there as well, but I'm not sure when we're going to get around to eating it with still having some of the meals left over that we received from others, so we brought out some towels to throw over them, and we're hoping that will be enough to protect them from the frost for the next couple of nights. Then the last thing that we wanted to hit here was our raspberries. There were a lot that were past their peak at this point since we didn't get out to do any harvesting the last couple of weeks, but we were able to find enough ripe raspberries for a nice treat after dinner that night. And finally, what would fall be without a volunteer pumpkin plant popping up somewhere out in our field? This year, it was right in the middle of the fenced pasture where we overwinter our cows, and somehow it survived all this time and was just starting to turn orange.
Get in there.
There we
That's a
go.
good looking pumpkin.
Not bad. Not bad.
The next morning, we saw there was definitely a solid frost that had set in that night. So we were glad we had worked hard in those days leading up to it to do all we could. That prior night, we had laid out the last of the sweet potatoes we had brought in, and it filled up pretty much the rest of the flat surface space we had left for curing. And we hadn't even gotten to harvesting our potatoes yet, which should be roughly double the quantity of sweet potatoes. Thankfully, a couple years ago, my parents had scavenged some extra heavy-duty storage racks for us from a store that was closing down in their area, and they had been occasionally reminding me about these storage racks every few months and offering to come set them up. Well, given the fact that we already used up all of our storage space, this finally seemed like the right time. While Joelle was out with the kids at their homeschool co-op for the morning, my parents came by early to set up those shelves in the basement. These are nice big racks on caster wheels, so they'll be great for the short term to lay out our potatoes on for curing, or just for general basement storage after that. And while they were doing that, I was close by in our soap making studio, giving that a much needed cleanup after pushing pause on production the last few months. You might recall earlier this year we did a teaser for setting up an area for soap making down here, and one of our big goals for 2025 was to produce and sell our soap bars on our website. While that hasn't fully materialized yet, we've taken steady steps along the way to make that a reality and still plan to make it happen this year as the growing season winds down. That was another big motivation to get the basement cleaned up and organized. So stay tuned on that, or make sure to sign up for our newsletter for all our personal updates. So bottom line, my parents are awesome, and I'm grateful that they're always willing to lend a hand at the drop of a hat. This whole week would have looked very different without their help whipping the basement into shape and getting us ready for harvesting. And by this point in the week, we were all pretty wiped and could use a little change of pace. So that afternoon, all of us went to a local pumpkin patch we've been wanting to check out that was just built this past year and looked super fun. It was a great afternoon of doing the corn maze, zip lines, shooting paintball guns, going on a train ride, and running around.
All right. Woo! Gus makes it through.
I remember past years going out to harvest beans by myself, spending hours locating and plucking each bean off the vine, and then looking back and realizing I really didn't cover very much ground at all and there was still a long way to go. Doing beans with our whole family is definitely the way to go, and our kids get really excited to be our bean hunters and search for beans high and low. And searching for beans in the Three Sisters garden is no simple task. The beans trellis up the corn stalks, and after the beans and the corn are both dried out, they pretty much become the same color and blend in. But it's also important to make sure that the beans are fully dried out before harvesting so they don't lead to problems with mold. For harvesting beans, we like to use brown paper bags to collect the beans in. The harvest bins won't work since you want something without holes so stray beans don't fall through. And you really just pluck the whole bean pod off one at a time. It's a slow and tedious process.
These ones are for me.
Our strategy is to hit one mound at a time, make sure we've covered it thoroughly before moving on to the next. Usually Jim follows behind and double checks the area we just did to make sure no beans were missed. We find it interesting each year that each mound can be so hit or miss, and we can't quite pinpoint why. Sometimes you might camp out on a single mound for 20 minutes harvesting so many beans, while other mounds you might be done in just a few minutes. If you have any pointers on beans, let us know, because we'd love for every bean plant we have to produce in abundance. And I don't know if it was from the extended warm weather we've been having, but we also had more beans than usual this year that were still green and hadn't dried out yet. We just harvested everything at this point, but tried to separate the ones that were still wet into a separate paper bag to let them continue to dry out. In total, we collected 3 full bags of beans and then a half bag of wet ones, and the best part is that with all of us working together, we were able to knock it all out in a single morning.
All right, I think we got it, guys. We're good. All right, let's grab the bag. Look for beans as we go. See if we missed any. Good job, everyone. Good work.
I think we all felt a little worn out after a really full weekend, and rusty for that matter, getting our bean shelling operation going on our back patio. Last year was our first year using the pillowcase method to shell our beans, and it definitely felt like we needed to relearn the process and steps all over again. But in comparison to shelling all of our beans by hand like we used to do, we knew this would be way faster. Shelling beans is essentially opening up the bean pod and removing the beans for storage. So there's a few steps or stations involved in the process. Step 1 is whacking. That's the fun one. So we loaded up a pillowcase with maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of one of the brown paper bags of beans. Then you whack it firmly on the ground. I find it best to whack it a few times, then stir up the beans in the pillowcase with my hand, give it a few more whacks, and then repeat that another time or two. When you can reach into the pillowcase and feel that most of the beans have been released from the pods, then you can move on.
Oh yeah! Let's see what we got. Okay, all right, bean hunters, assemble. Here we go. Find the beans, guys.
So step 2 we call bean hunting, and that's where our kids jumped in. We'd remove as many of the shells from the pillowcase as we could and dump them in some sort of bin. In this case, I just used a large cooler. Inevitably, there were beans that got pulled out of the pillowcase or didn't release from the pods. The kids would dig through there and try and find as many of those beans as they could. The next step is the fan, and this is where we use 2 stainless steel mixing bowls and then the fan to remove all the chaff or little extra bits or extra shells from the beans. So I dump everything out of the pillowcase into a bowl. Usually I'd go in and pick out some of the larger shell pieces out of there by hand. Then you'd turn your fan on high and pour the beans from one bowl to the other right in front of the fan. The beans are heavy enough that they fall in, but the little flakes and pieces, the chaff, would eventually all blow away after repeating dumping from bowl to bowl a couple of times. And after that, the beans are cleaned up and ready for storage, and we dump them into a food-grade 5-gallon bucket with a gamma lid. At one point in this process, our pillowcase actually sprung a leak and I noticed beans flying out while doing the whacking. So I went downstairs and got another one, and believe it or not, that one had a hole too. But 3rd time's a charm, and we finally found a good hole-free bean pillowcase. This wasn't our best bean year ever. With all of that effort, we ended up with roughly 2 gallons of beans, which should last our family for a few months. Beans can be a tricky one to justify, especially on years like this where they're not as abundant. It's really pretty inexpensive to order bulk organic beans from Acre, but at the end of the day, harvesting and then shelling the beans is probably one of our favorite garden tasks that we look forward to every year. It's slow food at its finest, and it's one that makes the cut every year, even if it's not the most productive part of our garden.
We come to the end of these weeks exhausted in the best kind of way. I remember reading through the Little House on the Prairie series as a family a few years back and hearing Almanzo and Farmer Boy talk about the races that took place at the county fair and how the farm kids always beat the city kids. That's the kind of strength that we strive for. Strength that's born out of a lifestyle and the things that we do to provide for ourselves daily. This quote from Farmer Boy is one of my favorites and sums it up well. A farmer depends on himself and the land and the weather. If you're a farmer, you raise what you eat, you raise what you wear, and you keep warm with wood out of your own timber. You work hard, but you work as you please, and no man can tell you to go or come. You'll be free and independent, son, on a farm.
Mommy, you want to do some bean whacking?
Oh, sure. I feel like you got to, right?
That's a lot of beans.
How hard are you whacking?
I mean, pretty hard.
Whack-a-lacka.
Whacker-do. All right.
Alright, here we go. My turn.
Mommy.
Watch out, I gotta stand back.
Watch out.
Mommy might get wild. Ah!
Is this about right?
Yeah, sure.
What?
I can critique your whacking, but I'll
I'll
just keep going.
Mommy.
Yeah. All right.
How many times do we do it?
Like that much.
There you go.
These are getting the dust.
Take out that aggression.
Ha!